you start to think back around, our lives. You look back and like, man, whatever tough life that we all think we had, when you hear stories like that, you
Yeah,
just go, what are we talking about here? Like, what are we comparing
yeah,
ourselves to?
yeah.
And like very similar. Like my mother, like she said, she was the eldest of eight, and so when she was old enough, she actually traveled from China, Hong Kong to the UK to study by boat. Okay, they could afford plane, but
Okay.
she traveled by boat. So I think it took like a month or 2 months by boat, and
Yeah.
and to get there. And the thing is that because my grandmother's like the family was so poor that they had to send, I believe, one or maybe two a brother and sister, like her brother, my mother's brother and sisters, my aunt and uncle, to England to stay with her while she studied. Oh, welcome to Wabi Sabi. Jim, it's great to have you on here. Like, listen, it's been a really weird week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's kind of start with the story and sort of where I'm at the moment, and let's talk about this. And I think where it relates to the topic that we have. Unfortunately, my grandmother, we call her Popo. Popo in Chinese is the usually it's the term used for grandmother on the mother's side. And
Okay.
so, so my mother's mother, and she passed away this week, and I got a text from my dad, mentioning that she passed on. And what was really interesting, like it's a fascinating story. Well, we won't bore you with all the details, but what's really amazing is that she's 101. Like she was 101
Wow.
years old. She just turned
101.
101 years old, and I'm like, wow. I really hope I have some of those genes, and I'm definitely working, daily to ensure that I live. I don't know, past 100. I'm sure you are too, Jim. Like that's what we do. That's why we do our fitness and all
That's
that
it.
stuff. It's
Yeah.
to give us our highest probability to do that. But reflecting on her life, I wasn't, like I said, it wasn't super super close with my grandmother because I've been in Australia. I've only seen her once over the last 20 years, and but I did spend a lot of time with her when I was living in Hong Kong when I was young, between 5 and 9. There,
Right.
they lived in a penthouse
Yeah.
apartment, and we used to go up to see my grandparents pretty much every week. We used to have dim sum every yum cha, every single Sunday for about 4 years. So when I was younger, that definitely spent a lot of time. And as we get older, we kind of drift a little apart just because we're in different cities and different countries actually. So as a reflection on her life, I just think about like, man, 100 years, like man, 100 years is a long
Yeah.
time to be able to really kind of create a legacy, and that's sort of where it stuck in my mind. And for me, and I believe for you too, it's just like there's this the journey of where we are. Like, let's face it, we are immigrants now. For say, like we're
Yeah.
immigrants into a
Yeah.
new country. I've been
Yeah.
immigrant twice now. One is Australia and one's now in Portugal. And I just think back my history and your history. We'll love to kind of dive into that too as well. It's a journey that started from a lot of decisions and sacrifice and grit
Yeah.
and suffering that our ancestors really took upon creating and made just tough decisions that kind of created the life that we have. And yeah, I've been reflecting a lot on that, Jim, and for me it's an appreciation. Like it's a massive appreciation
Yeah.
for the amount of, I don't know, I mean, I hate to say pain and suffering because I'm sure life was good too, but there's a lot of tough things that they would have to have gone through because my grandparents,
Oh,
both my
100%.
grandparents
100%.
on both sides, my dad and my side, actually both my parents, my father grew up in Calcutta, India, and my mom grew up in China, and both of them grew up in poverty. And to think that in one
Right.
generation, choices that they made to make a decision to move to Canada, individually, by the way, they met in Canada, got married,
Hmm.
obviously had us, and be able to create a life like at such a starting point, the life that I was privileged to live. Like, I wasn't like, amazing. Like, it was upper middle class. Like, I want to say middle class, upper middle class, maybe. But even to get to that point from poverty in one generation, in like maybe a span of like 10, 20 years or so, It's just a fascinating thing to me, anyways. And this is what
Yeah.
I want to kind of lean into today is like that immigrant mentality and that mentality that immigrants do have. Um, because I feel like they're thinking not like for the moment, they're thinking for generations.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
love to kind of dive into
Yeah.
it. So sorry for the long intro.
No, it's actually, it gives a great context. It gives it an important spot. I just want to be really transparent with all our listeners, if that's okay, Lawrence, in that we were going to probably talk about something else today. And the events of what you just shared, which I really want to acknowledge you for, which are really raw and authentic, we both during the day, I checked in. I'll let everyone know. I checked in with you today and said, "Hey, are you okay to proceed? And you okay to go through?" And you said, "Yeah, look, I'm cool." And during the day, I had this feeling that this would be a really important topic. If we could get you, if you're in a place where you can talk about it, which is like this, the whole art of imperfection. It's authentic. It's real, hard on our sleeves. We're being totally honest. And I just want everybody to know that in the moment, we just went, we're talking about this. And so this is coming from heart, from both of us, head, heart, gut, and through the light, the school of tough knocks that both we have felt, but also generationally have been there. So I was just giving you another context and to acknowledge just how tough that might have been for you, to even just bring this up as a topic. So um, I think it's a really important topic. I think it's a massive topic. I think just on that, are you the eldest? Well, do you have brothers and sisters at all?
Yeah, I do have a brother. I'm the eldest of two. My brother's, back in
Right.
Canada
Okay.
and lives in Canada. My mom,
Okay.
is the oldest of eight from my mother, the
Right.
grandmother
Okay.
passed away. So she's, the mother of eight children. So she's the oldest. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So here's the context that I'm bringing because within your culture, within Greek culture, there's a big burden that's placed on the eldest kids, right? And my mum and dad both migrated to Australia. The story of that was both my granddad passed away. I never met my grandfathers, right? Um, but my mum, her mum was basically crippled, so she couldn't. Back in the day, she missed. She didn't have the diagnosis of a hip issue picked up at birth, so she was effectively she couldn't work. She was her whole life. So effectively, she brought up three kids. My mum was the eldest. And effectively, long story short, after my grandfather passed away at 11, 12, she actually ran the household. She was responsible for looking after the family, right,
Mm.
financially. So she ran out at 11 and 12 and started working, right?
Wow.
And my dad on the other side, I'm going to give you some context as well too, because this is going to really open things up. My dad is the second eldest in a family of nine as well, and they also came from a farm back in Greece. But my dad literally moved to South Africa for a while and pretty much worked and sent everything back to the family so that they could survive. And then he moved to Australia and he had six sisters. And the process was he went back, he came to Australia, he started working. He sent everything back. He paid and married off six of his sisters. When I say,
Wow.
pay, like, please understand culturally,
Yes.
you've got to understand the time. And he
Yeah.
was responsible for basically marrying his sisters off because his dad couldn't basically afford to do that. So literally, he left from South Africa, came to Australia in his 20s and 30s. Up until he was 38 or 39, every cent went back to family. All his sisters got married. Then he go, great, I'm at zero now, and he started his own life back there.
Wow.
And that's the stock that I guess I come from, that you come
Yeah.
from, that that is really to try and give out people an understanding that when my parents then came to Australia to give myself and my brother a chance of a new life, they were like thinking, like you said, like long term. They were like, I'm going to eat, metaphorically speaking, a shit sandwich if I have to, because my kids are going to have an opportunity that I never had.
Yeah.
So it's really it puts context into what you just said about that. So let's open this up because I suddenly got goosebumps here. So I'm actually tapping into something here as well too. So let's talk about that.
Man, like that's an incredible story, and that's the thing. Like you start to think back around, our lives. You look back and like, man, whatever tough life that we all think we had. When you hear stories like that, you
Yeah,
just go, What are we talking about here? Like, what are we comparing
yeah,
ourselves to?
yeah.
And like very similar. Like my mother, like she said, she was the eldest of eight, and so when she was old enough, she actually traveled from China, Hong Kong to the UK to study by boat. Okay, they could afford plane, but
Okay.
she traveled by boat. So I think it took like a month or 2 months by boat, and
Yeah,
and to get there. And the thing is that because my grandmother's, like, the family was so poor that they had to send, I believe, one or maybe two a brother and sister, like her brother, my mother's brother and sisters, my aunt and uncle, to England to stay with her while she studied, because it was just easier, and they couldn't feed them or something, like that, like, so mom, here's, like, just imagine my mom, probably,
yeah,
I don't know,
yeah,
like, let's just say 19 years old at the time, trying to, like, study, and at the same time, got to raise two younger kids, right? That's her brother and sister, who are a lot younger. And think about that for a second. Like, our teenagers
yeah,
or our
yeah,
kids is like 19 years old, they can barely cope. Like, how do I keep up with, like, partying and going to school at the same time, right?
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
it's just a different world for them to kind of absorb.
yeah,
And you're absolutely right. Like, my grandfather, like, going back to, like, my grandfather, growing up in poverty, he somehow, and the story goes, like, somehow he was a construction worker, I think, and in cement. He used to drive a truck, cement trucks. And then he bought his first cement truck. And then he started, then the cement was used to build all these apartments in Hong Kong. So then he bought one, and then two, then three, and then built a huge real estate
yeah,
portfolio in a company, in a way, to build all these buildings and apartments in Hong Kong. So he was able to, like, take this, out of himself and his family out of poverty, and to build this something amazing. And, all of these things, like, is just these history, this work ethic that seems to be there when you're kind of have to kind of, push yourself. Like my father,
yeah,
when
yeah,
moved to Canada, like, he had nothing, he just had,
yeah,
he studied in Canada, and he just had some friends, blood brothers kind of thing, like, that grew up in India, that moved to Canada and took care of him, and he kind of raised his level of security for himself. And it's like, it just goes to show that there's this mentality. I'm trying to figure out what, like, obviously we're just trying to look and dive deep into what is that mentality, what was it in them to kind of go, like, what drove them to just going to succeed. And I think that, I don't know, maybe we can discuss it, but I think, in my opinion, it's almost like, it's like the have to mentality. Like, you
yeah.
have to make
Totally.
this work.
I was about to say it's an element of burning the boats in a way. It's like we can only go forwards because we can't go back. And for my dad, I know fundamentally it was he had a responsibility that he was working on, right? And so he looked at his current situation and said, based on what I can see around here, this is not sustainable. I've got
Mm.
to do something different, and I've got to take the biggest jump and the biggest leap and the biggest risk of my life. And in his mind, he could ratify that or rationalize that because he was doing it for other people. So it wasn't so. My dad's passed away now, and I wish I could have these conversations with him now, particularly as I've gone through that same journey, right? But there had to be an element of going, this isn't sustainable. I need to change something. So
Mm.
either, Brendan Bouchard says for things to change, either something's got to change in you, something's got to come into your life, or something's got to come out of you, right? One of those
Mm.
two things. And something huge came out of them. Right? But here's a really
Yeah.
interesting thing. I love your take on this one as well. Is there's knowing that I was the eldest son of that kind of decisions where someone went, "Hey man, I'm sacrificing everything to give you a chance to take this opportunity up." there was a massive burden and responsibility that I had. So subconsciously for me, I was like, I can't afford to muck this up. I
Mm.
can't waste this opportunity. And so I was the hardest working grind. That was the mindset that I adopted as a way of being grateful for that opportunity. I'm not sure if you can understand the
Yeah.
context or
Yeah,
relate to that at all,
absolutely.
Lauren.
It's like a pressure, right? And I don't like being
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
eldest. Not that my parents ever put this on me, you know, but it's almost like this. And I don't know. Like I'm trying to look. I'm trying to like reflect back. Is it what was it? My pressure of my parents? I don't think so. I don't think they ever pressured me to do anything other than just do well. you know, I mean, let's face it. We're a Chinese family, so it's just do well. That's expected of you. Um, but it wasn't ever forced on me, like most other Chinese parents that I know. It was
Right.
almost just sort of like just do your job kind of thing, do well. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't for the family, it wasn't for like
Okay.
it was just do well. And but I almost had, but I think I put the pressure on myself. And I wired
That's what
is
I was
wired
talking
it in
about. That's what I was
myself.
doing.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like I put
Yeah.
this pressure on myself that I have to like make this work, and it's. And I told my parents this once. Actually, I actually did in the talk. I was able to do a presentation once, and my parents happened to be in the room, in the audience, and I wanted to use that talk to honor them. And the honor,
Yeah.
I basically said, it's like I talk about my parents. I talked about the some of the stories that got them to where they are. And basically, the takeaway I wanted to say was that they gave me a solid foundation to work with,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
just felt that it was my responsibility to not f it up. Basically, it was
Yeah.
like almost
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
responsibility to
That's
like
exactly what I'm
to
talking
carry
about.
the torch.
Yeah.
It's weird, right?
Yeah.
And but so
Yeah.
here's my question to you
Yeah.
though. Here's my question to you. I'm just like trying to think about, like, do you think that it's in your DNA that you were able to do that and take that torch and just go with it? Or like, is it learned? Because what happened, like, I mean, I guess we can call it our success story within our families. Let's say we know we done
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But what if we didn't have what it takes to be in that when that pressure was there, we just freaking crumbled?
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah.
what makes the difference of
Well,
someone having that right mentality versus someone crumbling with that responsibility?
yeah. Look, that's a great question, and there's the whole scenario where quite often people will say it's because of the experiences that came out. So, like a lot of when you study a lot of people who've done amazing things, it's the adversity quite often that they had to cycle through and work through to basically succeed in their chosen endeavor. It wasn't always easy or simple, and it's the challenge along the way that really fortified that steely resolve within them to keep going. If you listen to people like Bruce Lipton, who's a biologist, and he's done some fantastic work about genetics and DNA. Quite often they
Mm-hmm.
talk about that. Often it's in your DNA. So there's an element of that I believe that's the case. And I trace my heritage back to Sparta. So part of my DNA is there's a warrior spirit in there, it's funny because for a long time I didn't make it wrong, but once times I embraced it, I went, okay, that's actually a part of me. That's when I got my tattoo, right? Which is the
Mm.
Spartan warrior, because that was me claiming my heritage, which for a long time, interestingly, I shunned when we first moved to Australia. It was like, because
Interesting.
we were different. I wanted to fit in. And so I let go of that part of my identity for a long time. But the moment I
Right.
actually claimed it and owned it and went, that's actually part of me, that really helped. So there was that part of it. But then also, here's the thing, like this is an observation that I found with some migrants as well too, is that sometimes some of them took the biggest jump you could possibly ever imagine, and then they played it safe for the rest of their life. Right? They
Mm.
never took another major
That is
risk
true.
ever again. It was like I'm gonna load them all up. I'm gonna go for broke, and if it pays off, I'm just gonna play the safe card ever since. And and that's what my family did. To be honest, like they did what they did to get to that point where we were here was phenomenal. From then on, I'd quite often go, "Hey, that was amazing. Did you do this? No, no, no." And I really butted up against that. But what I took out of that was it wasn't unusual that if things weren't right, you didn't have the capacity to change it. And so to me, I thought it was a combination of heritage, but also experience and seeing what that would be. And so my reference was, okay, if you want to get stuff done in this world, you've got to go all in. And that was my reference.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's just wired differently, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with,
No.
people not pursuing like certain people who, I mean, I look at some people and it's like, man, I don't know how you do that, right? And they probably look at me and
Yeah.
they go like, I don't know how you do, how you don't do that, right? In a sense. But then
Yeah.
I look
Yeah.
at, so it's the same thing. So like, it's not, so I want to be very clear to the audience. It's like, we're not making this right or wrong. It's just more
No.
identifying whether or not, are you living up to that potential that you actually have inside of you? And I think, the reflection upon, my grandmother this week and just thinking about my life and, to be honest with you, losing my grandmother was, the hard part was actually the reminder of losing my mom. Right. And it's like, it brings back all these memories of like, oh yeah, I never got a chance to see my mom, and that was hard, just during that COVID period
Yeah.
and not being able to see her and say goodbye. And
Yeah.
that was tough. And
Yeah.
but it brings back all these memories and not going to be able to ask those questions, like you were talking about. Like, I'm not going to
Yeah.
be able to have those
Yeah.
conversations that I want to have. But the thing is, at the same time, I'm also going to remember, like, and this is what I use it as fuel. Like I'm using this as a reminder to myself because I know I'm going to forget. Is that we are on this earth for a limited time, and we have this potential to be able to like do something great with it if we choose to. But that's up to us, right? It's up to us. I'm not saying like it's just a good reminder, like, hey, you got lucky. Like I got lucky to be placed in a position, by my parents and my grandparents to be in a position to be able to like really make a good life, not just for me, for my kids, for my grandkids. And there's that sense of responsibility that, I've forgotten about for a while, and it's like this moment is
Yeah.
like just that reminder and going, hey, like, there's a lot of things that's not going right, but at the end of the day, is it really that bad? And also
Yeah.
reminding like, what are we doing all this for? Right? Because at the end of life,
Yeah.
like, the one fact of life is that we're all going to die, right? We're all going to die. And at some point, and it
Yeah.
might be soon, it might be a lot later. I hope it's a lot later, but how are you going to be remembered? How are you going to remember? How would people talk about you? And and that's, when you start thinking like that, it starts to, really put in the context of like, am I really worrying about like this week and next week, or, my bad situation and what I'm trying, like, is the goals that I'm actually trying to go after, are they even worthy of my time?
Yeah.
Are they big enough for the effort that I'm putting in? And yeah, it just goes to kind of like, it just creates all these questions in myself.
And Laurence, first of all, mate, I can't imagine what that would have been like. My dad passed away before COVID broke out, and he was in a nursing home, and I couldn't have imagined what that would have been like if I wouldn't have been able to visit him. It would have been really tough. My mum, actually, it's really interesting. On the day that my mum passed away, she'd been in hospital, and she was in hospital, and I had a reunion of, it was at our house. We had 100 people in our home. And these are the people that I've done a lot of personal growth and development with. And they'd flown in from all over the country. We were having a reunion, and we're having it at our house. The next day we were going to a football game, with my closest friends, Bettina and her female friends were going off and doing a whole lot of fun events for themselves. But we were aggregating on a Friday night at my home. And I'm driving home, and my brother called, and he said, listen, Mum passed away. And, I pulled over to the road, just, wept. And then I called Bettina, and I said, listen, Mum's passed away. She says, do you want me to ask everybody to go? And there's 100 people in our home. And I went, no, actually, right now, I actually could really use the love of my friends and community around. So I drove home, and we spent the evening, we had this bonfire in our home, and we just circled up, and I just got to talk my piece and honor my mum to the people who I cared about at that time. And it was a really special moment. I actually think that helped me through that
Yeah.
to
Wow.
to cycle through it. And I was actually able to let go of a lot of the angst around that because I actually had a community of people around me. I'll never forget that. That was just basically a ceremony that I was actually able to help with my mum. And then I went and saw her, and so as hard as those moments were, and with my dad, sorry, Lawrence, I was going to jump in there. I got an opportunity to say goodbye to him, and when he was struggling, and he was still up until the last moment, he goes, "Okay, you want to do this and this?" And I go, "Dad, everything's going to be okay. I've got this." And he could just go peacefully. So I had an opportunity to do those, and as hard as they were, I had closure. So I really feel and empathise that for you and what they would have been like, because I feel if it was me, it would have been really tough.
Well, I'll tell you the story here because I think it's important for context. So my mom got sick pretty fast, and it was during COVID. And so what's really interesting about my mom is that she's always been a like when it comes to like her health is really poor. She was a foot reflexologist, and she was really always into alternative health, and that's one of the reasons why I became a chiropractor and so on and so forth. But but she was always she had this thing around Wi-Fi, and she's just scared of like this Wi-Fi thing. I know it seems like tinfoil hat, but it wasn't that way. It was like literally she just did not like, the radiation of the Wi-Fi and stuff. And so when she got diagnosed, she didn't want to go get an X-ray or an MRI or anything. And I'm like, Mom, could you just please just, go get some, so we know exactly. She goes, what for?
Yeah.
She goes, I'll heal it or whatever. And I was like, oh, it's so frustrating, But so the reason I'm telling you about this was because at the end, like near the end, like I don't know if her mind was going or not, but it was like she was adamant that we would not talk over Wi-Fi. So what does that mean? That means no FaceTime. That means no video. I had to call her on a landline, right? I had to call on a landline, and that's the only conversation I had. So I never got to see my mom. I never got to see her, and that's the hard part. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? It happened, like I said, within months. Like, not the diagnosis, but the thing was progressing, and I can feel it. I mean, I didn't have to talk to the doctor to know that it's progressing, and there was no chance. And I was talking to my coach about it, Jeff Spencer, and he was telling me, he goes, Lawrence, you need to talk to your mom. You need to say whatever you need to say. I go, yeah, I know, but I don't. I go, I think it's fine. Like, I mean, she still got months. She still got time. He goes, and he gave me the best advice. He goes, Lawrence, just say what you need to say. He goes, because if you tell them near the end of their life, their mental capacity is not there. They won't hear it. They're not going to feel it. And I was like, oh, okay. Never thought about it that way. Because what are we trying to avoid? And this is a really genuine question for all of us, right? Like, what are we trying to avoid? Those hard conversations. Why do we avoid it? We want it. Like, in hindsight, we all want it, but yet we don't do anything about it because it's too hard. We want it, but at the same time, it's hard. It's so freaking hard, right? And I remember doing this. I picked up the phone, I called my mom, and she just, and she's like trying to argue with me, whatever. Like, I was like, da, 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 da. I'm like, Mom, just stop for a second. Can I just talk to you? And she was fighting me. She was fighting. She goes, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be okay. I'm like, Mom, I just need you to stop and just let me say what I need to tell you. And I just like, blah. I was like bawling my eyes out, just like tearing up and just I don't even know what I said, but I just needed to like tell her I loved her, all that stuff. Right. And until I just told her, like, stop, just listen. I just need to get this out. It was one of the hardest conversations I ever had to have, but I had it. And then when she realized what I needed, like, it was really more for me. Let's face it. It was more for me than her. Right. But when it happened, when it finished, it was fine. We said our goodbyes. That was fine. But that was the last time I spoke to her. Like, pretty much the last time I spoke to her, because within a week or so, like, things happened and it progressed a lot worse, and then she died in peacefully and in her sleep.
Yeah.
And man, like what you're saying, if I never got the chance to say those things,
Yeah.
oh man, that would have hurt. I think like
Yeah.
that's where I was not that I was okay with my mom passing, but it honestly, like I was at peace because I
Yeah.
knew it was coming,
Yeah.
but I said what I need to say, and yeah, I was at peace. I was at peace. Of course, it hurt.
Well,
Of course, it was
there's
painful. Blah blah
closure,
blah. But
right?
it's yeah,
There's
yeah,
closure, and you talk to anybody who's gone through that, they've lost someone, and either things didn't finish off, the last conversation wasn't horrible, and they just run that program through their whole mind, right? So
Hmm.
here's the scenario, and what I want to bring this back to the migrant immigrant mentality. It's actually really interesting because years earlier, I had to cycle through the idea that because of the opportunities that I had, my capacity to earn money and income was exponentially higher than my parents' one. And they were independently wealthy, but through sheer grit. So I learned that whole work hard and the linearity of that. But I got to a point where I remember one year I earned more in a year than my dad had earned in 5 or 10.
Hmm.
And there's this concept where you feel guilt around that.
Yeah.
If you've grown up in a patriarchal system, metaphorically speaking, and you are out earning your father, there's it's like the prince and the king type scenario.
Right.
And I had this conversation with my dad, right? And I go, listen, Dad, I just need to just have this conversation with you. And here's the scenario. I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable. He goes, and he just looked me straight in the eye, right? He says, what do you think we moved in? What do you think we moved to the other side of the world for? Is for you to do that. He goes, and you succeeding on a grand level doesn't minimize me. It validates my decision to go for it. And
Yeah.
that happened years before my dad passed away. So it was tough conversation as well, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what I've learned is not to be scared of tough conversations. And when you lean into those, and sometimes those tough conversations I'm at the effect of, where my kids have gone, right, okay, as a product of your mindset and your history, and hey, you're the kid of the migrant kid, I still carry programs about just working harder and fast. And so I've had to be at the effect of going, okay, I'm listening. And I'm basically open to what my kids are trying to give me information about,
Yeah.
right? So it goes
Absolutely.
multiple ways.
Yeah, and I think it's like having those tough conversations means like you got to come from a background or at least have some experience that you actually have to you gotta have to have tough decisions and tough things you have to do. And going back to that immigrant mentality, I think back to my parents and your parents and anybody who's an immigrant, it's almost like you have to get into a position where they're and have experienced a bit of suffering and you want life to be better. And for us, I probably think it's a little bit more challenging because compared to our parents or compared to most things, I don't know about you, but I almost had to wire my brain to think I was suffering, even though theoretically
Yeah,
on all accounts I probably wasn't. But almost like I had to create a story, and maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't, but it was true to my mind that all my friends were better or all my friends had better things,
yeah,
and that made me kind of want to work harder to achieve that. And I wonder
yeah,
if I was given
yeah,
everything, I don't know, because it's comfortable, and so therefore you kind of lose that drive to actually succeed. And so being an immigrant, meaning like when I moved to Australia, or when I moved to Australia, especially when I had like, I don't know, $10,000 between Karen and I, and like we had to make it on our own because there was no other people there. Like of course, like there's no one there. We didn't know
yeah,
anybody. Both our parents back in Canada. And it's like we had to make this work, right? Of
yeah,
course, we always had the security that our parents are always back there, right? We can
yeah,
always go back. Of course that,
yeah,
but it's almost like we had to put ourselves in, like you said, burn the ships, like and we
yeah,
had to put ourselves in a position like there is, in a sense, of feeling like there's no going back,
yeah,
right? Or at least a feeling like you got this opportunity, do something with it, and let's see where you get. And taking that risk and that opportunity, that challenge, I think, requires, at least in your head, to create a story that you got one shot at this and give it a go. Learn to fail.
Yeah.
If you fail, great. Like that's fine. There's always a safety to go back, right? But I think that's the immigrant mentality that I think a lot of people in maybe the next generation don't have, or some people don't have, because you never really put yourself in a position where you have to do it on your own and you don't have that safety net, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, safety net's there, but it's so far, it's a little bit further away. And I think that's where that's the only way I feel that we can get outside our comfort zone. And this is for every little things too. We'll go into little stories here, but I would say, like, I don't know, but if you agree with me, it's like missing some sort of the safety net, or the safety net is a little bit further away.
Yeah.
Is what causes that, that mentality of the work ethic that we're talking about.
Yeah, you work it out. There's a process, a lot of people call it the struggle, but it's actually in the development. I really feel that people need to work stuff out for themselves in a lot of ways to build that capacity and hardwiring. Sorry, the connections within their brain, because if they don't work out that they don't have the problem solving capacity of making it happen. And this is actually really relevant for me right now. My eldest son moved to New York last week. He doesn't know a soul in New York. He's following a dream, and we were just chatting, and he's as independent and as driven as I am and was at that age, without question, probably 10x that. But when I was chatting to him, I go, hey, listen, you know what? I know you're going to work it all out. I know that, but just know that no matter what, we've got your back. And it was just a conversation that he knew that he's got the support if he needs it. He's not going to reach out for it, but just to know that you got, and I go, dude, I know you've got to work it out yourself. I know you can work it. You've got the capacity, and I want you to work that out for yourself, because lo and behold, if I'm not here one day, I can't bail you out. I can't rescue you. You got to work this stuff out. And that's one thing my dad always used to do. Is
I think that's
if there was an easy way and a hard way
that
for
part
me
is
to
so
work
important.
something out, he would make sure I got the hard way out first. He would not make it easy for me, because his mind, in his immigrant mentality, was, dude, life can be tough. And my way of preparing you for that is to throw all the challenges at you right now to teach you the skills, so that when I'm not around, you can perpetuate. You can metaphorically keep the family going because you've learned the life skills.
Well, so for me, I experienced that when I went to university. I know it seems like a silly story, but I was like 18 years old. Went to university. Went to University of Waterloo. It was about an hour away from home. So, I was living in campus, so I wasn't at home. And I remember like feeling like my first couple of months, I was like really struggling, like not struggling, but I was like, man, this is scary. And, studying for these tests, like everybody's smart, like you're no longer at like the top of the student. You're like, man, everybody in university is so smart. And you're like, you're like, I think got this big test. And I remember calling my mom, and I'm like, and I remember asking her like so clearly, I'm like, if I fail, you're still going to love me, right? It seems so silly, but I remember she's like, of course. Like, my mom's not a very like loving and affectionate type of person, but I remember her, she's like, yes, of course. Like, that's silly. Like, of course I love you. But just knowing that, like, comfort zone, even though I talked about like how not having a safety net, like I said, we all have a safety net, but it's further away. But knowing that that's there, it will catch me, but not catch me like from the initial pain, but will catch me eventually. Knowing that gave me permission to take risk, right? Gave me permission to kind of go for it. And I think that's a challenge being a parent, right? It's like, how do you create 100%. A safety net and comfort zone for your kids, but not so tightly wound that if they just fall, like, oh, I gotcha, right? It's he's got to be backed off away a little bit to like, you're gonna have a couple of tumbles before you use the safety net. I think that's a challenge as a parent. And I think, but going back to this immigrant mentality, like that push, that drive, I feel like you need to have a sense of like, this is on you. This is the sense of like, there is nothing, that you could lose it all. And the more comfortable I get in life, financially or whatever, I start to lose that, and this whole incident with my grandmother is waking that up a little bit in me to kind of remind me, I'm like, hey, don't sit here in comfort. There's more to this. Like, you got to stop being comfortable, because that's not how you're wired. At least that's the story I'm kind of spinning in my head right now. It's like,
But but
come
but
on,
that
like,
makes sense. That makes sense to me. And I'll tell you why. It's because my dad always used to say, "You guys have no idea what it's like to go through tough times." And so so back at home, my dad would have conserves. He'd have a storage facility. He'd have backup food. He'd have this. He'd have toilet paper. He'd have it all. Like it was almost like a shelter that he had ready to go. Because if all hell broke loose, he was like, "We're good." Right? And
mm,
so he always conditioned us into the mind of, listen, you've got to be self-sustainable. You've got to work out how to be adaptable no matter what life throws at you. And you can only really learn that when you've had to journey through that, right? You
yeah,
don't, and even a scenario where, when we bought our first practice, in order to secure a loan, I was $20,000 short. And I said, "Hey, Dad, can you help me out with this? I'm having some trouble with the bank." And he goes, "No." I go, "But you can do it. You have the capacity to do it." He goes, "No, work it out." So I worked it out, whatever, finalised it, organised it. That's probably where I started the whole structuring of deals and stuff, I'm sure. But I worked it all out, found it all out, had the strategy, organised it, paid it off, and went, "Hey, listen, everything's done," and whatever. He goes, "Great, you want the money now?" I go, "I don't want it now. I don't need it." He goes, I go, "Why didn't you give it to me when I needed to?" He goes, "Well, if I gave it to you then, you wouldn't have
yeah,
worked it
yeah,
out, right?" So I
yeah.
went, in your deceptive way, you taught me a really tough lesson, which now I can look back and go, that was great wisdom. But at the time, I was pissed at you, man, like, because you're making my life tough. So
Yeah.
it's the balance between enabling a disempowering behavior and challenging someone to find the greatness within themselves.
Oh, what a smart father. That's awesome. That's a great story, and it's like, and that's a challenge I constantly face in my mind. It's like it's one of those things that haunts me. Is like, how do I instill like this immigrant mentality for my kids? Like, let's face it, like they are so, live in luxury, and like they're just so
Yeah,
over, like, everything's given to them and there's no hardship.
yeah,
And it's tough to manufacture that. But as an adult listening
yeah,
here, I think it's important for you to understand is what I guess what I'm trying to say, not necessarily what Jim's saying. I'm saying, like, you gotta create a story in your head to that,
yeah,
create like some sort of need or desire to like put a light of fire up your ass to kind of go do something, right? Because
yeah,
because let's face it, we're all like, if you're listening to this podcast, we're privileged. Okay, like, if you
yeah,
like, you have the equipment, the internet to be. Most of us are privileged, and so we are in comfort. But the of course, we all want to be better. That's why you're listening and watching this. But at the end of the day, like, unless we make it that this life that we're living right now is that uncomfortable, it most likely won't move you enough to go after what you really want. Like, you have to make it
mm,
almost so uncomfortable that you actually go, "I'm enough of this. I am doing this. I am moving forward. I am making that decision. I'm taking that risk." I'm not saying like go all in and like that you can't fall back from. Like, I think I mentioned this in other podcasts. Like, fail fast, fail firm, which means that you still have the ability to launch, even if you fail, have the ability to take another step, make another decision, and firmly on your feet, that you can actually still stand to go take another shot at something else. It's not like, this is the only time, but I think that there's got to create that story in your head somehow to say, like, this is unacceptable. I live a better
yeah,
standard.
yeah,
I deserve better. I need to, I get to do this. And I think, someone mentioned this. I think Tony Robbins said this. I heard this from someone else, which is like, it's like successful people, like, they get to, not have to. I know this is a little contradiction of
yeah,
what I just said earlier,
yeah,
but it's like,
yeah,
it's not about
yeah,
have to, but it's almost like getting to the point, I get to choose to do this. I get to
yeah,
go after this dream of mine. Which is slightly different, but I think is still valid in the sense of creating a story in your head that this life is great, but it could be so much better, and there's got to be some uncomfortableness with it for you to pursue. I don't know. I'm
yeah,
just
yeah.
talking, and I'm hoping that it makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, it does because for me it was almost like I had to create a story in my mind about where I was and how I was relative to everybody else, and so for me, I think as a migrant kid, I felt like there was a huge. I was starting from so far behind the pack that I had to just go, right. I'll do whatever it takes. I will follow it through to not only to be seen, but also to reach where I am and achieve my outcomes and goals. So that was really hardwired into me by virtue of the fact that I didn't like that. And so in order to excel, if you don't start with the opportunities or the privileges, you're kind of running away from something. And this is what I found. So sometimes when you look at motivation, some people are running away from something and then other people are running towards something.
Yeah.
And I am clear that for my mum and dad, myself as well, a lot of immigrants, they're running away from something in some way, right? Either situation, tough situation, whatever. But at some point, it's got to flip. And this is what a lot of the work that I've done with my coaches over time is, dude, you have to flip that at some point so you're running towards something else. Because otherwise, you've always got that monster in the background just in your ear telling you that you're not enough, this isn't enough, you're not good enough, you're not trying hard enough, you've got all those kind of things that even when you achieve something, you can't get to enjoy it and appreciate it and find peace because you're running that different mentality. So for me, there were two distinct phases where I adopted the persona of someone where it was Jim against the world, took on all those things that I had to do, and that worked to a point, up until the point where I started achieving phenomenal things and going, yeah, but how come I feel lousy? How come I don't feel as good as I thought I was going to do when I'm achieving all these things? It's because I had to flip that meaning and story you're talking about, Laurence, to take on a different meaning. To basically suddenly go, okay, dude, I'm not that 7-year-old kid now who can't speak the language, and I'm in a pack of wolves around here. You've got to fight for your life. You're actually moving towards fulfillment and joy and contribution and your legacy and liberation. And for me, that was peace.
That's so interesting. That's what I was about to say. I find in my current state, I find that, and just being raw about this, is that I'm finding it easier when the fear of losing something, like that fear of running away from something, is required for me to launch myself forward. And so I guess
talk about that. Expand on that. Yeah, can you expand on that?
Yeah. So like I get what you exactly, because I think my life was like that too. Like, I was always kind of like trying to prove myself to myself, and so like always running away from it. And then and this is what I meant by getting to a level of comfort. You get to a position where like you're winning, and you're succeeding, and everything's great, and so you start to achieve those things. But then I find that, like I said, when you get into comfort, like at least for me, as I get more comfortable, I felt like I've lost that tenacity and that grit and that drive. I want it, but then it's like part of me just goes, yeah, like, do I really want it? Like, and I'm sort of getting into the state right now. It's like, what's wrong with you? Like, not in a bad way. It's just like, I'm just kind of like, what happened to you? Like, and I'm not negatively talking to myself. This is just me kind of reiterating sort of how I'm feeling to myself. It's just like, it's more just like, I know I'm not like 20 years old anymore, and I don't need to do all those things, but I feel like what's necessary for me right now, and I'm not sure if this is true, but I feel like what's necessary for me right now in this moment, okay, not like, in my age, in this moment, I just feel like I need to get back to the rawness of going, I almost got to manufacture that I'm going to lose it all.
Yeah.
Just to kind of create that spark.
Yeah.
And just like being ignite something in me to go after something. And then I feel like, based on what you said, I feel like at some point I will shift back to the desire. Yeah. But it's almost like, I feel like, so an analogy would be, I had the spark, pushed hard for a few years, created success, everything's cruising, but it's still going, it's cruising well. But I feel like if I reflect upon like life and what it's all about, I'm like, no, I can actually go faster. Yeah. But in order for me to go faster, I have to almost light the boosters that I didn't even know existed. Right. No, and that's what I mean. So I'm not going back from zero. It's more like I'm already cruising at a certain speed, but because that speed is a lot faster than what it used to be, but because, everything's perspective, the speed is like pretty much the same for me. I feel like I'm not moving at all, but of course I am. But I need to like manufacture a story in my head to kind of like, you could lose this all, and almost like send a spark to go like, I need to like those other boosters so I can go faster or move towards
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know. That's
And
sort of how I'm feeling.
Lawrence, we will do that. We're going to do that. You and I are going to do that anyway. But you know what I was thinking of when you were talking about that? You said Rocky 3, Eye of the
Rocky
Tiger.
3.
Rocky 3, Eye of the
No, I
Tiger.
haven't seen
Have you
it.
seen it? Mate, do yourself
No.
a favor. Go and watch it. Rocky 3, when Sylvester Stallone fights Mr. T, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I'm not a spoiler, but just go and watch it. And there's a scene on the beach where he talks about why, pretty much what you talked about. It was like, I'm watching this movie, and I've watched this scene so many times, I can't tell you, it's not funny. Because
Okay.
whenever I felt like, okay, I've lost the mojo or the drive, and maybe, and it happens sometimes, someone passes away, something, you get really reflective, and you suddenly go, okay, where am I at right now? And I would have played. I used to have it back in the old. That's how old long I've had this video. I had it in VHS
VHS.
tape, and I'd worn out the tape. Yeah, right. I used to play it all the time, and then it gets stuck on that darn thing. But so I was so glad when they went to CD, and now you can live stream it. But
I was going to YouTube
it's
that
actually
clip.
what you're talking.
No.
You YouTube it, but watch the movie, right? Because what it talks about is the comfort, and it talks about sometimes you get back to your true self. You've got to get back to what it was that inspired you. And let's be honest, we're not 20 anymore. So, but how can we tap into the spirit of what that was like if you need to progress and move forward, right? That's the
Yeah.
immigrant mentality you're talking about. They're the boosters because there are physicality, there are limitations of matter. We're not going to be able to, we don't want to necessarily do that. And you and I are both at a time in our lives where we want to be strategic and a lot more discerning in terms of where we put our focus and energy. We've spoken about this offline. We're making meaningful impact and meaningful contributions and meaningful money. It's not about, so back in our 20s, we can motivate ourselves to go just do whatever it takes and whatever. But with the filter of age, you go, okay, well, is this fulfilling me now? So is another metric. But I think in terms of the link that I hear what you're talking about and the immigrant mentality is finding a way to tap into the spirit of that 20-something-year-old Lawrence who is happy to run through brick walls, but now as a mature person goes, dude, that's not the smartest way, but is there another way we can do this?
And one of the things that, will give you an answer to that, like one of the ways I've found lately is actually surrounding yourself with people, which we've done an episode on, right? The 5 closest friends and stuff. But it's actually, I found that you got to surround yourself with people that inspire you or are doing things that are unique, not to say copy them, but to go, holy crap, I didn't even realize. So I was just out to lunch with someone the other day. And he's actually 10 years younger than me. He actually went to the same university as I did in Canada. And we're just having a discussion. I'm like, oh, so how did you get started? And he tells me the story. And he talked about like, so what's your vision here in Portugal? And it's like, tells me this. I'm like, holy crap, I am thinking so small, right? I'm like, look, I've been around with some big people, like, and I'm like, okay. I'm not saying that that's what I'm going to do because I have no desire, but it's like, okay, Lawrence, it's time for you to reset now. And like I said, I'm not trying to try to emulate anybody else. It's just me. I'm just realizing I feel it. Yeah. I feel this part of me just going, okay, there's more to this story for the next 50 years. And what is that going to be? And I get a choice. I get to, design what that looks like. And I think that's the fact that the reason why I'm mentioning this is because not everyone's like this. Not everybody's in that situation because we're all different ages and different flux of life. I just want to kind of go through the gamut. And if you're feeling this way, it's just like, hey, you're not alone. I just want to be real. Like, you're not alone. We don't, Jim and I haven't figured everything out. It's just like we go through moments like this. And that's why I want to be honest with this is like, that's how I'm feeling right now. Yeah. Now I might come back next month and say like, hey, all sorted and this is what I'm doing. But I want this to be part of the journey, right? The art of imperfection is just this. It's like, we're not perfect. And this is the imperfection that you're seeing. And I'd love for you to kind of go through that journey with us to see what it turns out to be like, because you're kind of creating and seeing it, live exactly where this story is going to go. So
and it's really important that you highlight that. It's really cool because back in my 20s, I would have really appreciated the 50-something version of myself to go, hey man, I would have appreciated the wisdom, and that would have been great. And but you're right about when you start associating with people that you hang around with. Not only are they bigger thinkers, but for me, I found myself being gravitated to a lot younger as well.
Yep.
So, like
Yep.
my training schedule, physically is with 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds. I'm fighting 20-25-year-olds, and they don't give a shit how old I am. They're going for me. And so that you can't think, oh, I'm getting too old for this, I'm too comfortable. And by the same token, when you start talking, some of the when I flew over to Portugal and we had our group with you there, Lawrence, there were people a lot younger. They're talking stuff in an area of tech and crypto, and I'm like, holy smoke, man! I feel like I'm a dinosaur here if I don't get with the program. And so it forces you to level the hell up. And I think
Yep.
that's encompassed. That's really helpful. That's the spirit of what I'm talking about. Is the Immigrant migraine. It's like you got to challenge yourself. You can't get to the point where you're going, I'm comfortable and I'm going to stay in my bubble and I'm going to listen to 1990s music indefinitely.
Yeah.
It's like, man, get out there, get out of your cocoon. Just keep checking yourself, keep forcing yourself. And if you're younger, partner up with someone who actually can see you and go, yeah, I can see where you're going, dude. You might want to consider this, this, and this, but let you run your own show. I think that's really,
Yeah.
there's a really magical. I was talking to a lady who says, I don't know whether it was in Japan, where they say that the perfect combination of a young entrepreneur is with an old head, someone who can just steer
Yes.
them through just the process. And that collaboration is one that shows up the highest level of success.
I remember listening to, I was at a seminar when I was a student, and one older chiropractor said, hey, listen, I'm still passionate about practice, and but things are just kind of just taking along. What's your recommendation? And the speaker goes, go hire a young firecracker. And
Yeah,
I still remember this. And I was
100%.
like, and he's like, because right now you're cruising, you're passionate, but like you're cruising, and when you bring on a young firecracker who's just like going to light you up, who's like 20 years old, who just comes out of school and just like ready to rock and roll, like you just need to
Yeah,
be reminded of that energy that you used to have. It doesn't mean that you're going to go after the same energy,
correct.
because obviously you're 20, 30 years later, but it's like, but you need to remind that spark is still in you. And that's,
Yeah,
your advice around like younger people. That's exactly right. I hang around with more younger people, and I think this is encouraging for anybody who's like younger, like 20, 30s, listening to this, like, listening to two old guys kind of talking. I can't believe I just said I'm old, but like 20, 30. But the thing
if it
is to
helps you,
realize that,
Lawrence, I'm a little bit older than you, right? So you suddenly just you're the second oldest on the podcast.
but it's if you're in 20, 30, like, there's your advantage, right? The thing is that, when I remember when I was 20, 30, I never thought, all these guys who's so experienced and stuff like that, you kind of like just forget about your power. And your power is, if you're 20 and 30 years old watching or listening to this, is that your power is that you have that unfiltered rawness and
Yeah,
tenacity and drive and boundless of energy, and the dream, the vision that you have, and the grand vision. Yeah, we don't have that as much anymore. Doesn't mean we
yeah,
don't have it in us, but we also know, like, there's a certain things that kind of, we're almost like too smart for our own good, because we all know like, oh, that can be done, but it's our own thing. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, but it's saying, but when you're younger, it's like kids. They don't know what's not possible.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
And there's there's beauty in that. And that's what I think, that the power and the strength, if you as a 20 and 30 year old listening to this and go, if you can own that, right? You can leverage that and partner up with someone, who is, older and a little bit wiser, who can help you, guide you through the narrow. And that's what coaching is all about, right?
yeah,
Coaching isn't about telling you what to do. Coaching is about knowing where the road bumps are going to be before you even know it. And their job is to gonna warn you about those roadblocks and those bumps and those dead ends, so that you can not totally avoid it, but just try to get you past them unscathed as best as
yeah,
possible. That's all
yeah,
we're doing. That's all we're
yeah,
doing. We're just,
yeah,
helping you. Like, we already know what's around the corner, right? We already know it's coming, right? We can't save you from all of them, but there are potholes. There's there's roadblocks ahead of you, and we're just trying to prepare you so you can be more prepared for them, right? You can't avoid all of them, but just more prepared for them. And this is why I think it's such an important thing to really balance the people that you hang around with. And I think that draws in the immigrant mentality. I'll leave you one more thing. I want to say one more thing, and I'll love you to kind of finish up here.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing I'm doing a lot of reflection upon, and this is what I'm doing, and I want to share this with you, and I don't know if it'll work, but I've been thinking a lot about the future self, my future self. I'm 48 years old this year. It's like my future self. Like, what would my 50-year-old or 55-year-old version of myself be like? And because I'm manufacturing that and going, well, because I'm trying to use that as a guiding post of what I need to step into and what I need to step up from here. And I don't know, as an exercise, I would love for anybody to kind of try that on. It was like, maybe think from your goals, not from your current self, but from your future self. Because no matter what, if you achieve or not achieve your goals, your future self is waiting for you. And how do you want your future self to look like and be like? Because that's what those goals are for. And if those goals are not big enough for that future self that you hope to have, then maybe you need to shift your goals to a higher level so that that future self is waiting for you to come in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, that's great. What I would add to that, and in closing too, Laurence, is that I think at any time you want to progress and move forward, there has to be an identity upgrade as well. You've got to actually upgrade your identity to the person, your future self that you're talking about, who's going to be the person who makes that happen and makes that come true. I think I'm at a really interesting point in my life where I can look back and claim and own the great attributes and the skills and the habits as a part of my pedigree, part of my migrant background, and claim them and own them and appreciate them and use them to move forward in a way that is a little bit more considered, a little bit more wise, and basically going, okay, you've taken the opportunity. And there'll be people out here who may not be able to relate to it because they haven't had the background that we've shared. That doesn't mean that you can't take the learning and the lesson out of that. You can actually go, okay, all right, so where in my world am I not challenging myself? Where can I put myself in a scenario to find what I'm capable of? So it's not, you don't have to be a migrant or a migrant kid to actually have the right to actually talk about it, but you can take it's like buying a book, right? Someone dedicates their whole life to a story, writing it, and I can go and pick it up for $20. This is what we're basically saying. You don't have to be a migrant. You can actually take the learnings and lessons and challenge yourself to move forward by adopting those skills of, I'm going to find a way. I'm going to make it happen. If I don't like what's around here, I have the capacity to change it. And as you said, Laurence, sometimes you've just got to think in terms of your future self, in terms of who I need to be to step into it to make that happen. I think I'm done. I think I'm cooked.
The immigrant mentality doesn't require you to move countries to be an immigrant.
No,
but you moving, right? So this is what you're saying, and what I heard was that if you challenge yourself to do something that is outside of your comfort zone and outside your norm, you are an immigrant in a way because you're doing something, you're migrating to something that's different, and that's when you can adopt that mentality. So I hope that everybody listening to this will take up that challenge, and I really appreciate all of you spending the time with us, listening to us, and babble on and talk about our lives. But I really hope that you get something out of it to really challenge yourself and really challenge, colleagues and friends. And please share this podcast with anybody that you feel like was going to help them with their life. So make sure you like us, share us, give us a review on any channels that you are listening or watching this, please. And I dedicate this to my grandmother and my mom. See you next time.